Today is Rogation Sunday, a day when traditionally the priest, together with their congregation, would walk the bounds of the parish. All lands whose people, at a time when and in places where Christianity was a monolith, were expected to be in the church building on Sunday. On Rogation Sunday, the priest would call on God to bless the land and the people. The seeds scattered at this time of planting would bear good fruit in the months to come, and all would be filled. It is also Mother's Day, a day in which we remember and give our thanks to those persons who have cared for us and held us up when we needed the tenderness of mother's love in our lives. And I would be remiss if I did not wish all of the mothers and mothering persons here a happy Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to you all. But at the same time, today is May 14th, 2023, and we are in Buffalo, New York. And many of our Black brothers and sisters and genderqueer siblings are acutely aware this Mother's Day that their mothers, their grandmothers, and the uncrowned queens of Jefferson Avenue, Celestine Chaney, Pearl Young, Kat Massey, Geraldine Talley, and Ruth Whitfield are not at their tables this year. Roberta Drury, too, will be missed this Mother's Day at the table she shared with her brother and her brother's children to which she had become a mothering figure. They will not be joining their parishes, their congregations this year in praying for prosperity, a bountiful harvest, and a life-giving rain over the months to come. They had the temerity, the audacity, the almighty gall to be born Black in America, in Buffalo, and to venture out on a Saturday afternoon to shop for food, the only grocery store in this city east of Main Street. An offense so heinous that a young man felt compelled to drive halfway across the state to lynch them for. To rip apart their bodies as he live streamed to his adoring fans. On this Mother's Day, my heart breaks for those for whom Mother's Day means mourning their mother's violent deaths. It is also heavy with apprehension and frustration and dread and disbelief. That young man was just a few years older than my babies are now. I can still remember when Ezekiel was a newborn, struggling to eat and not able to get enough sunshine in the early days of a cool October. He was so tiny and just wanted to snuggle and sleep, and when I tried to feed him, he could not be stirred. It was the most terrifying moment in my life. In another place or age, I could have lost my firstborn when he was only a week old. But a quick trip to Children's Hospital in the blink of the eye, he is preparing to go to middle school next year. Somehow, that helpless, scrawny little baby is already 10. In less than 7.5 years, my darling baby will turn 18. The age of the man whose hate, paranoia, despair, and fear of those he saw as different and other than, less than human, caused him to cross state lines to purchase an armory, high-powered weaponry, and drive hours away to our city, our home, to kill, to lynch, to murder Black people just going about their lives. That reality, that someone so young, so much future ahead of them, can become so filled with hate, paranoia, despair, and fear is, in and of itself, terrifying. On Friday, I had the privilege to attend a panel discussion featuring 4 prominent Black men and women with ties to the city of Buffalo, including our own presiding bishop and Buffalo's native son, Michael Curry. Now, I love listening to Bishop Curry speak because he cannot help but preach the gospel. Even when he is being asked to simply have a discussion, it becomes a sermon. And it becomes a sermon that fills you with hope and belief. When the disciples reflect on their walk to Emmaus, that their hearts were burning within them as they heard Jesus preach the good news, I cannot help but think of how Bishop Curry speaks and how unbridled he is in his love of God and humanity. Even the rigidity of the British royal family and the traditions of a royal wedding could not contain him. So, each of the other panelists would be asked a question by the moderators and answer the question. But Bishop Curry would preach the gospel. But preach it in its fullness, not just pulling from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but from the Psalms and Amos and Dr. King and Archbishop Tutu as well. And he spoke of the legitimacy of the human need for anger, especially anger directed at injustice. As human beings, he said, we have the right to righteous anger, which is supported not just by Jesus flipping tables in the temple, but also by the teachings of the prophets. But he also spoke of that anger to need to flow from and back into love. Because true love is not oblivious or unconcerned with how things came to be, or the history of individuals or society or their flaws. It begins from that spirit of truth that Jesus promised us in today's gospel. True love is rooted in truth-telling, which allows each of us to see each other as fully human and as the image of God. True love is rooted in learning to love the person in front of you in their wholeness, blemishes and all. After the panel discussion, Dr. Ibram Kendi, author of Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and How to Raise an Anti-Racist, spoke. Perhaps the most profound insight I heard from Dr. Kendi was when he was reflecting on the history of racism in America. He talked about how slave patrols and later lynch mobs arose as a way for poor white people to be controlled. Poor white people in the South experienced profound poverty, but they would support those institutions which most directly contributed to that poverty, because they could look upon their neighbors and say, well, at least I am not Black. When anti-poverty programs were implemented that helped Black families, they also helped those poor white families. And again, poor white people would fight these very programs that lifted them out of poverty and lash out against their Black neighbors. They would conspire with the sons and daughters of plantation owners to control their Black neighbors, because it meant that they felt superior. Throughout the centuries, poor white folk surrendered their own good to others for a sense of superiority and privilege, rather than for true prosperity. Not only did these men and women hurt, torture, and murder their neighbors, but in doing so, they also hurt themselves and contributed to the early deaths of their own children. Now, he did not connect it, but Dr. Kendi later spoke about how sexist ideas give him as a man privilege. Assumptions are made about him, spaces are open to him, and roles are assigned to him simply on the basis of being and being perceived as male. When talking about privilege, he talked about the need to act selflessly, to abandon one's privilege because it is the right and moral thing to do, to lift up others because one loves those others and sees their humanity. But when listening to him, I could not help but think of those poor white Southerners who were lied to and bamboozled into joining lynch mobs and slave patrols, into doing the dirty work, into torturing and murdering their neighbors for the privilege of being white. To be in some way closer to those plantation owners who controlled all of the wealth in the South, who lived in luxury and opulence, while all of their neighbors, white and Black together, suffered. And I could not help but think that when we accept our privilege, whether that is being white or cisgendered, heterosexual, or male, or able-bodied, or financially secured, or whatever that privilege or combination of privileges may be, we accept our own repression. When we choose to turn our backs on the harm that is done to others because it makes us feel superior, we not only hurt those others, we hurt ourselves. Loving our neighbors as ourselves is not just about loving those neighbors, those others. It is also about loving ourselves. It's about telling the truth about all that has gone before and building together God's kingdom here on earth. It is about, as Peter through Luke preaches, recognizing that he who is Lord of heaven and earth does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands. God lives amongst us and within each of us. We recognize this reality. We find that the bounds of this parish, the bounds of this church, are not something that can be walked in an hour, in a day, or even in the course of a lifetime. Our parish, our church, like God's love, is boundless. We are all brothers and sisters and queer siblings. We are all connected. When one starves, we are all deprived. And when each is fed, we are all filled with God's bounty. Amen.